Okay, good morning, everyone. This is a Howard County delegation meeting, and we are going to be meeting relatively briefly this morning. Members have another commitment to get to, but we have Howard County 1021 on the agenda, and there is an amendment. Oh, there we go. And there is an amendment which has been discussed conceptually, and members just received a draft of it this morning. So I'm going to go ahead and ask Delegate Ebersol to walk us through it since we're just seeing it this morning.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So with some, first of all, credit to Dara for taking what were scattered ideas and doing a really yeoman's job of cobbling them together. I think we'll have some commentary, but he was still working late last night throwing this thing together because he got more instructions at 4 o'clock yesterday afternoon from me and said he would do them. And so he was burning a little bit of 8 o'clock oil last night. Good for him. So there are, if you have it in front of you, it's a little bit jumbled. What says at the top, page 2 of 3, which is actually the third page if you're scrolling through it, has the first significant thing in the amendment. And that's the definition of something called a community resource officer as opposed to a school resource officer. It talks about several parts of it, defines them.
Excuse me, Delegate Ebersol, I'm sorry to interrupt, but
Sure.
Dara, can you please pull up the amendment and share your screen just so we have the amendment in front of folks who are following along?
So Dara, if you'll scroll down to what is actually the third page in right there, then you can see in front of you a definition of a community resource officer. You'll notice that important points that were included from several people are kind of the second and third ones. That says that they'll be the intended first responder to the school. It also will say below that they'll be trained in the same, they should have been or are trained in the same way an SRO is. And I think most importantly to most people that this person would not be stationed at the school or on the school property anywhere. So if you scroll down, Dara, to the bottom, to about 2/3 of the way through that page, you'll see that we have this is school security employee definition. It says they're not an SRO. They're employed by the school system to provide safety and security. They are unarmed and they do not have the power to make arrests. Now, in Howard County, school security officers don't have that power, but there is precedent for it in other parts of the state. And so it was felt that we should make sure that they didn't slip into more of an SRO role in the absence of SROs in the building, and we would say that. Okay, Dara, if you would continue on. I think the next page is pretty bland. The next couple of pages, at the top of the one that says 3 of 3, that would be on the document. I don't know for sure, but it says 3 of 3 at the top. This is where we really get into the meat of it. It actually occurs, I'm sorry, on the page right before. Yeah, Howard County Board of Ed shall develop and approve a plan beginning in the next school year that we have that. And then you can go to the next one. And this is really sort of kind of the meat of what we're getting to. This replaces SROs with the CROs that we're talking about to provide adequate coverage. We've had some discussions. I picked by the end of the first semester when I was doing my part, putting my part into this. So they have, starting next year, they'd have till January. There's been some discussion that maybe that should be more immediate. It will effectively address if there is a potential need for school security, more security personnel or any, and it addresses the need. And we put the need around potential need because we felt that was true for a bunch of support systems that exist. That's number 3 there. Then number 4 says they'll complete the training. And then Roman numeral 3 there basically just says that it doesn't require any sort of committee or anything, but when they're seeking input, they should be reaching out to groups that particularly are underrepresented, are also sometimes disproportionately impacted. And I thought of 5 groups. If anybody wants to add others, I think I was writing quickly, but those are the ones that I thought perhaps would be the ones that would need to have a weigh in. And that's pretty much the changes that exist. I don't think there's anything else significant, those 4 points. And with that,
I have a question.
Yes.
So once they do number 3 here and get that developed. There will be an actual resource officer in the schools.
Is that a question?
Yeah,
Madam
Question.
Chair, do you want me to answer that?
Sure, go ahead.
No, the idea is that these people would effectively be other school personnel that would do many of the things that we say SROs do, but without any professional training in those areas. The idea is that according to the way this is written here, basically by January of next year, there'd be no more SROs in buildings. And community resource officers would not be assigned one-to-one to a school, but they would be assigned to a community. They could be assigned to a cluster of schools. They would be around, they would be the intended first responder. We can't make them be because they may not be available at the moment, we said, but we'd want them to be the first person to show up at a school.
Have we talked to Dr. Marano and the principals of the schools in Howard County?
Have I talked to them? Yes.
And they all agree?
No, we haven't gotten agreement on this yet.
Okay. What was the general response?
I see the chair has an interjection there.
I'm sorry. I just wanted to make sure we get to other folks' questions. Delegate Novotny.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Delegate Ebersol. So originally the SROs are provided through the police, Howard County Police, and they're funded through grant programs. So with that being said, if they are transitioned, this new resource officer, if it's transitioned to the school, what do you envision, how do you envision the school paying for that? And what do you think the trade space for these new employees will be in the sense of who are they not going to hire or employ to have these new resource officers?
So I think the community resource officers would hopefully still be provided. It doesn't say they have to have them, it just says who they are. But I would hope that the school system and the police department would come up with an MOU similar to the one they have for SROs, where the police department would still supply them. And they have officers that are currently trained. So there would be no new training for a bunch of them.
So just a quick follow-up. Is there an opportunity for someone to be an employee of the school system, which I think is what you just said, but paid for by the
They would be the
department?
security officers. Lots of high schools currently have them. Some middle schools do. They're often ex-police officers, but not uniformly. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I completely understand. And then if
so the idea is they might want a few more of those individuals in a building, or they might not. We didn't say they had to. In fact, we put in some language to indicate they didn't have to. But they would be less. We would think if they felt they needed some of those folks, that they wouldn't be armed and they wouldn't be arresting people, and so that they would be a different sort of person in the building.
Perfect follow on, just real quick, is that if they are not armed and not able to arrest, then what services can they provide in your first responder response?
Well, the first responder would actually be a police officer. If you needed a police officer in a building, you'd call for them. And that officer would presumably be somewhere in the area and would come to the school. And I mean, we're going to have situations forever where police come into buildings for various reasons. And so
Of course.
the idea is
Okay.
that would be the very legal thing that would happen. But these people would actually probably have, I've seen them, I don't know if they still want to, we could discuss their role, but they often do a little more routine discipline than SROs are supposed to do and often don't do, like getting kids to class on time and that sort of thing.
Thank you, Madam.
Next up, we have a question from Delegate Tarasa.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. I think I'm having a little trouble following this, so maybe I can better understand, maybe you can help me understand this, Delegate Ebersol. There are two different people that we're talking about. We're talking about community resource officers, and we're talking about these security assistants. Is that
Right.
correct? Okay.
We currently have two people like that already, just that
Yeah.
they're school resource officers and security personnel.
Right. And did you say that neither of them could arrest?
No, community resource officers are regular police officers. They would have all the powers and responsibilities of a normal police officer. Basically, they just wouldn't be stationed in the building.
But are the community resource officers dedicated to the school system, or they're working in the community?
They're working in the community, and that's my vision of it. If that's not clear, we can clear that up in the language. But my idea is that the school is sort of their beat, okay? If I can use that term, I don't know if
Yeah.
that's the term anymore or not.
Okay, so there's going to be a community resource in every community and not necessarily one-to-one.
Right, that's why it says school or schools. I'm sure it says it somewhere. I made sure to put that in there. Yeah, yeah, right there. Thank you, Dara.
Okay, so their beat is, so
Yeah,
they,
I mean,
and they,
choose a community like Wild Lake. They might actually have several schools. They might have Wild Lake High, Wild Lake Middle, Harper's Choice Middle, and maybe some of the feeder elementaries. I don't see it likely that they would be needed at more than one of them in only the most rare situations. And then there are other police. We don't really want to have untrained police officers, ones who are not trained in the school setting in there, if we can avoid it.
but would there always be one on duty?
No, and that's why it says intended first responder, because we can't guarantee that. We can't ask the police to guarantee that. It is during the school day, so they could mostly work a day shift, and maybe there's more than one. Maybe you have two assigned to that area. It doesn't say.
Okay,
That would be up
Okay.
to the MOU between the school system and the.
so they're working for the police department. It's the security officers that are working for the school system.
They'd be in the building.
Okay, and how many of those are there in
Didn't
this?
say.
Okay.
Toward the end, it
All right.
just says that they need to come up with a plan that addresses any potential need for them.
Okay, I'm sorry,
Next.
I misunderstood. I thought you said the officer couldn't arrest, but the security office, okay, I got it. Thank you.
Security officers can't.
Delegate-
Yes, ma'am.
I'm sorry, I'm just trying to move us along because we've got a couple more questions. Wait, only a little bit of time. Delegate Watson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Delegate Ebersol, I appreciate your work on this, and it seems to try to get to a lot of the issues that we've been discussing in a way that is comprehensive. In terms of the intended first responder, could you explain again what that means?
To me, it means that if an administration or someone on the school feels a need and calls for police to come to the building, this would be the officer that would be dispatched to the building first, if they can be.
Okay, so in a perfect world, the person assigned to that school or schools would be the one to show up if there were an emergency or
That's what I was going for with the language.
So I assume that the chief of police is okay with this. Is that how have those conversations gone with her?
We did, I'm sorry to say that we put this together rather rapidly. And as I said to Delegate Kittleman earlier, we haven't had deep conversations. I have shared this as quickly as I could with Maureen Evans Arthurs at County, and she's going to bring it to police. So we may yet have to get some input from them on this.
Okay, so do you know how the funding would work? I mean, I think as Delegate Novotny said, the SROs are grant funded. Would the community resource officers be eligible for that money?
Well, that's something that I didn't realize they were grant funded, and thank you for telling me. And I would like to think we could, if we need to put that in there, certainly could do that.
Wait a second, if you need to put what in there?
That they would be grant funded similarly to SROs.
But how can we determine that? I mean, that's up to the grant funding entity.
That's true. Thank you. It's an excellent point.
So assuming, I think maybe we need to figure out what the money trail is here.
I
And
think you're right.
the other thing is, what is the fiscal note for this amendment?
I don't, thank you for asking. As I said, we've been cobbling this together over the weekend. We got Dara to write it. So we haven't gone too deep. I'm really presenting it conceptually for the most part at this point.
Okay,
And
All
I'm
right.
not married. I'm not married to anything in it. And it needs tweaking. That's why I knew that the expertise of this delegation could help, but I thought I'd give us a framework to work with here.
I appreciate your efforts. It's just,
Yeah.
I'm just trying to make the pieces fall into place. One last question and I'll turn it over. I assume that you've checked out sort of the legality of it. Is the amendment legally sufficient?
No, I'm not sure of that either. Okay. And you've touched on a number of points. Like I said, I wanted to get this together and show, but I'm not sure if we're in our lane here in this particular case.
Okay, thank you. Delegate. I appreciate your work on this. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Next up, we have Delegate Hill. We're going to need to keep it brief, and then we do need to depart at 8:20. So Delegate Hill, you can
Right.
quickly ask
So-
your question.
Yes, so Delegate Eversole, I really do like where you're going with this. I think we've got the CRO taking care of the concern about there being some armed assault on the school, and they're trained like the SROs, but they're not in the school. And I see the school resource officer as, and this is where the question is being what you and I used to know as the vice principal, right? The person who enforced discipline and knew who all the kids were and got, is that about right? Is the CRO playing that role, or is it somehow more involved than that traditional disciplinarian?
I don't think they're equivalent at all because a vice principal would be in the building all the time and a CRO wouldn't.
No, I'm talking about the school resource officer.
You know, this amendment would remove, and so did the bill, would have no school resource officers in the building anymore.
Okay, all right. So there aren't two people in this bill. I thought there was the police officer who's now the CRO outside the building, but there would be someone in the building. Just, we talked about the teachers seem to be misusing the SROs as they are now. They're using them for discipline and for breaking up fights. Well, breaking up fights might be, but because they don't have control of classrooms and other things that they used to take on in vice principals. Is there anyone in this bill who non-armed, not part of the police department, plays that role, or do we need the school system to go back to reassigning roles and responsibilities for the people who are in school?
We haven't invented a new position in this one. The
Okay,
school security personnel already exist in many places in Howard County at this point.
that's what I'm talking about.
We're just defining them and making sure that they don't subsume the role of an SRO in terms of arrests.
Got you. That's what I was talking about. I'm sorry, the school security officer. I said resource. I meant security.
Security personnel, I think, is the term I use.
Right. But they're doing some of that breaking up the fight kind of stuff that the vice principal used to do, but a lot of our regulations and laws have changed, so there's no laying on of hands, and can they do the things that occasionally are needed that teachers no longer can do in terms of laying on hands to protect students and others?
They are hired by the school system, so they would be allowed to do the same things that any other personnel in the building would be allowed to do as far as laying on of hands goes.
They're just going to be better trained.
My recollection is that we could only do that if we were protecting somebody from harm to themselves or others.
Right. Okay.
So
Thank you.
we unfortunately do need to wrap for today. Today's meeting was really just to present the amendment and start this conversation. Clearly, Delegate Eversole, we have some
Work to do.
you have some
Yes.
work to do in terms of sharing
I
and
was-
getting feedback.
You can see
And
that I'm
we-
not taken aback by that concept. I knew that. Okay, so
And we will have, we will invite the Board of Education and the county administration to be with us next week. So we will pick up this conversation at our meeting next week at 9 a.m.
many of the conversations that you've asked me if I did have, I intend to have. And anyone who's interested in having them with me, let me know. And we can get together as a group with the school system and with the county on these issues. And the police, excuse me.
That's
That's the
good.
county.
Okay, thank you all. We are adjourned. We'll see you next week at